So for years, or over the past 30 or so years, the evolution of the motorcycle industry has taken, rather precarious, several very rather precarious turns, and I think we all can agree that Harley Davidson is the epitome of American patriotism and the pride and joy of America. However, um, there's a lot of animosity, or there's a lot of, I wouldn't say animosity, but maybe rivalry between, some of the culture clashes or some of the characteristics that we tend to associate with certain groups versus another group. And as technology and as high tech um, pervades and changes the way we do business or the way we communicate, sometimes it tends to cause, deep, deep strife and deep divisions within cultures as a result of this. I wouldn't say it's a survival of the fittest. It's a game of survival to the fittest. I would say it's a culture, okay? And that culture is defined by characteristics that I'm going to analyze and take a look at. Now, whenever you look at a society, okay, now I'm formally trained on this, so it's not like anybody's going to, argue with me or dispute me about the science of it. There's no way to dispute the science of things, but that's another scientific fact that we don't want to right now discuss about motorcycles or about Harley Davidson because, again, there are deep divisions at this time, and a lot of whenever these deep divisions occur, people begin to get a little nervous about their future or what the future holds. Okay, so basically here I'm going to try to inject a little academics into an equation that has perplexed and even, confused people for years. This cannot be disputed, though. Okay, um, as a culture, we are defined by characteristics and I would say characteristics that are admired. And that culture of characteristics that we admire become the pride of our nation. Okay? So basically, we have one factor of something called culture, and then we have something called deviance. Okay, so we have culture, and I wouldn't say it's counterculture, kind of like drugs in the 1960s. I wouldn't say it's counterculture. It's something that the Pentagon and the military is a little nervous about because of the 1960s. But there's another word for it. It's called deviance. And social deviance is the term, actually. Social deviance basically defines that pride or patriotism that we have in a culture. And that culture is formed by a set of characteristics that we either admire or consider social deviance or deviant behavior. So it can be deviant behavior, but we're going to take a brief look at this, okay? And we're going to first define what Harley is, Harley Davidson, or the culture. I guess it's a culture, maybe some people call it brand loyalty. I don't know. I see it more of a culture than a brand loyalty. But when you look at Harley Davidson, there are several aspects and characteristics that cannot be denied. And one of the first characteristics that we associate with Harley Davidson is patriotism. There is no dispute that both the police and the military are a set of that culture that Harley Davidson has produced because the pride involved. The pride of Harley Davidson is based on police and military, I guess, military veterans. Um, so when we get into the Harley aspect, the single most aspect that we probably associate with the Harley Davidson phenomenon is patriotism. That patriotism goes back in history, and it's a tradition. Yeah, so it's a history and a tradition that goes far back into the evolution of the internal combustion engine and the age that we call industrialism in the American culture, American society. So when we look at Harley, the first thing we see or associate with a Harley characteristic or the Harley name is patriotism. The second thing that we associate because of the police, military, and the history of tradition is honor or pride. When I say honor and pride, I'm talking about not money. Money tends to, material things tend to give people honor and pride, but there are non-material and undefined things that in the totality have some type of formula or have some type of interaction with the final result, which is honor and pride. When I say honor and pride, I'm talking about championship qualities. Championship qualities. Okay. Now, what do I talk about when I say championship qualities? Well, is it money? Are championship qualities money and material? No. Championship qualities have something to do with money, and money is a driving factor in a lot of things our society and culture does. But money is not the single most factor that defines a culture, a nation, or any individual human being. Material is a big part of that, and the love of money is also a big part of that. But when I say championship qualities, I'm talking about raw DNA, okay? And when I say championship qualities, I'm talking about characteristics that we find in individuals that are very high in our society. Okay, so here's what I'm talking about when I say championship qualities. Ambition. Harley Davidson doesn't want to admit it, but they attract very ambitious characters and people that have a very high level of ambition. We see this at the academic levels. Whenever you get into ambition, drive, and what we call self-actuation. Okay, the term self-actuated means that nobody has to tell you what to do in life or the secret formula that you need in life. The secret formula in life is based on your set of DNA and your internal drive, what scientists or sociologists call self-actuated. So when you talk about ambition and academic drive, you tend to talk about self-actualization or self-actuated people who have these set of characteristics that tend to force them to the top, and they kind of float, no matter how difficult or how troublesome the waters may be, they just float. Another factor that defines, I guess, championship qualities is, I wouldn't say a what's the term? A predestination, or a oh my god, I can't think of the term. But when you resort to crime, certain characters, um, certain characters in a society like to resort to crime. Because of the history of the police and the military, most Harley riders don't resort to crime because of their championship qualities. And, you know, whether you throw them a curveball or whether you throw them a fastball, that championship quality is going to rise to the top and it's going to float. It's their internal drive. It's what causes, it's what defines, the students in our schools. It defines the people that we grow up with, and it defines, a lot of parts of corporate America and business. It's not necessarily, material driven or money driven. It's just that championship quality. So when I say that the culture, and I wouldn't say it's a cult per se, I would say it's a culture that's predominated by patriotism and pride in a history. It's got a lot of history in it, and therefore that patriotism and pride is based on fundamental building blocks that have defined who this our nation is, or the greatness of America. But when certain individuals or certain characters resort to crime, we tend to have a different set of characteristics and a different set of precursors by which the criminal world follows, such as honesty. Honesty is a big one. Honesty, that's a big factor of crime. Greed, greed is a big factor in crime, nowadays. Violence, or the nature to hurt other people, whether intentionally. Also the matter of control. Criminals tend to subjugate people through the use of control. And not only do they subjugate people, they are able to control the outcomes of events when they have a control measure over human beings that can get them into trouble or call the cops on them, things like that, control factors. But there are other aspects of crime that we can look at, such as, nature or nurture. you know. It's been a big question, when you get into crime, whether crime is by nature or nurture. And there's a lot of data on that. I'm not going to even touch that topic, but basically it says that your DNA, your DNA and your predestination has something to do with nature or nurture. Or if you're just corrupted by somebody, maybe a human being has corrupted you and shown you a different path in life that is just, the criminal world. But just to touch on crime, there's basically what I'm trying to say is that there are a set of characteristics that we do not see in a lot of Harley Davidson customers, or I wouldn't say it's a cult, but a culture, because again, that sense of patriotism, pride, and championship quality is so strong that you can't possibly associate it with crime. So we tend to have this set of characteristics. Even vocabulary. Vocabulary is another one. Vocabulary is a big factor in crime. How people interact in terms of written or spoken English. Now, when we talk about crime, we even talk about gender. The majority of crime is basically male driven because it's such a violent, it's like a violent aspect to the criminal world. Force, and control is a big factor in crime. So when you talk about gender, women tend not to be very good criminals simply because they can't run as fast and get away, but they can't really, exert that level of violence that causes people to be scared, or they can't throw up a certain level of violence or injury to others that a male can, especially to the police, which are the single most factor in crime. It's not necessarily the criminal sometimes, but the amount of force that the police throw at the criminal. So it can be gender. The gender sometimes, is a big part of crime. Other factors is, your your who you hang around with, and how you were brought up, and these factors, socio-economic factors, such as what type of neighborhood you grew up in, all those things end up in some way or another determining whether or not an individual is I think the term that I'm looking for is pre something, predetermined, it's a I forgot, it's a term that it's on the edge of my mind and I can't think of it right now, but basically it says that your proclivity to crime is more so the percentage, or the formula that we're talking about in their DNA structure. The proclivity is higher, and the than another person. That's what I'm trying to say. It has to do with DNA, and it's a psychological word. I can't even think of it. It's on the edge of my mind, but let's move along. So these factors, all come into play when we are looking at the future of Harley Davidson. Right now, the future of Harley Davidson are based upon those fundamental principles, what I call the three big movers and shakers of our society. And when I say the three big movers and shakers of our society, I am talking about patriotism, honor, and culture. Your culture, how you grew up, what you grew up in, how these things are defined. All, for instance, I'll give you an example. If you sit around and eat all day, which some people do, some people don't, but if you sit around and eat all day, your work level will drastically be impacted. Now, some of us grow up with a culture shock. So if you were to go in the military or go into some type of, Olympic training schedule, you can't sit around and eat all day, but at the same time, you're going to suffer from culture shock if you, are put into that situation that you're not accustomed to. So when I say that, people tend to see that culture shock when they speak of Harley Davidson. And that culture shock can also have a big impact, or a big significance, when we talk about animosity or deep rivalries, that culture shock. And I'll give you an example. Criminal gangs tend to be rivals, and they don't get along until they rally against something, such as the police. Whenever you rally against the police, the factors tend to drive them together rather than pull them apart. So the big boogeyman for the culture of criminals would be the police. That's the one single factor when you look at a cultural aspect, or a cult. The cult is that the criminal cult is against the police culture, and the police culture is a very strict interpretation of our society, or deviant behaviors, which are just what we allow and don't allow based on other factors such as financial, religious, or, you know, cultural, you know, cultural norms, you know. So those three big factors right there, religious, financial, and political or culture, are the three big significant movers and shakers of a society. Okay, so when we say Harley Davidson, I'm seeing for maybe 20 or more years now, some animosities and some cultural differences that over the years have worsened. I think it's worsened. It's worsened more so than gotten better, because it's hard to, retrain somebody in how to live life, um, or how to define their culture. But we're seeing this animosity or this rivalry, more so now, I think, between some of the Harley riders and some of the other factors within that industry. Now, I don't spend my time thinking about this stuff all the time. I'm just very academically trained to recognize a lot of this, because a lot of my work, or before I a lot of my work before dealt with a lot of factors that were more important than motorcycles or this stupid stuff. But I think the championship qualities are, something that a lot of people will agree to when you speak about Harley Davidson and what type of atmosphere it is. It's an atmosphere that is geared to produce champions. And when I say champions, I'm talking about pride, I'm talking about patriotism, I'm talking about ambition, I'm talking about, resorting to crime, I'm talking about honor, I'm talking about honesty, I'm talking about all those factors. It's not a matter of money, it's not a matter of control, it's a matter of freedom. That is freedom. That is our ability to express ourselves in our pursuit of liberty, but also our pursuit of happiness. And that is the fundamental key to happiness: who you are and who your society is. Because who you are and who your society is, let's say you're a felon, you hate your society, obviously, because you're a prisoner. You're a prisoner to your society, and you will always be a prisoner so long as you're a felon, and people will treat you in that way. So when we look at these factors, such as the police and the military, pride, patriotism, honor, and all these things, there is no question, and it's undisputed, that the Harley culture is based on these championship qualities. But some of the motorcycle, like Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Ducati, KTM, Husqvarna, who else have I not mentioned out there? Hyosung, even the American companies, Indian, and the new ones, Zero, the electric bike Zero. All these companies, and even that one company in Alabama, the V4 one, I forgot what it was. Anyhow, you know, um, there's that animosity between them and a brand loyalty, and I think people just take it a little too far, maybe. But we do see that in MotoGP or racing, the racing world. Um, but it's that championship quality that unites us. It's that championship quality that makes us greater and makes the country greater, and it leads to better futures, and it leads to that certainty that 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 there's no clouds over us or anything like that. I think some of that is real, and some of that is fake when you take a look at the culture of Harley Davidson and the cult of some of the other brands. They tend to rely less on mental aspects and more of a spiritual aspect. Where science and spirituality are separated between the metaphysical or the spiritual, the unknown, the other world, and the world that we live in, or the reality. So the reality is that the reality is that Harley Davidson has a culture that sometimes has to run up against a cult of brands, and that unification factor is based upon other factors such as culture. So these other brands tend to conflict a little with culture, while the basic principles that made Harley what it is, I mean, it's a reliable bike. I mean, nobody can say, Harley Davidson's not a good motorcycle. They're not that fast. They don't break as well, but they are very reliable. I mean, it's like any car. Can it brake well? Can you go fast on it? Well, who cares if it's not reliable? So all those factors, I think, are the reason why many riders, or the Harley crowd is based upon a 50 plus. They say that Harley Davidson, the only people that can buy Harley Davidson are people that are above 50, and that's why they don't want to ride like BMWs and stuff, because they'll probably kill themselves. They don't have a death wish, but on the flip side, you need a lot of skill. You need a lot of skill these motorcycles will kill you. These motorcycles, even a Harley Davidson will kill you. So imagine what a BMW, S1000 would do. It will probably kill you. But, the majority of the Harley crowd tend to be over 50. And that is because the impossibility of buying a motorcycle such as a Harley Davidson if you're 20 or even 30. Like me, I was forced to buy a Ninja or a Honda because simply I was 16 and I wanted a motorcycle. So my options were limited. It wasn't whether or not I wanted a Harley. It was that I had no choice in the matter. And if given a choice in the matter, it'd be different. But I had no choice in the matter. So this is why Harley Davidson tends to attract people over 50, and the majority of them encompass what I've mentioned as the three core principles that make up a society, and the aspects that a culture can thrive in. That culture thrives when these characteristics and these factors are, the most important factors of survival. So anyways, I'll just leave it at that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that, a lot of people don't see Harley Davidson as patriotic. They tend to see Harley Davidson as a gender neutral. They tend to see, other bikes as, not having that culture that we oh so admire and are so grateful for, in upholding our liberties and freedoms, and, the pursuit of happiness. I'm not saying that you can pursue happiness greater on a Harley than any other motorcycle. I'm just saying that, the police tend to look down a little on motorcycles because the crowd that it used to attract tend to be a little bit more rebellious, and they tend to resort to crime a little bit more often than the greater society, or what we call normal people. But what I'm trying to say is that nowadays nowadays the customers tend to be a little bit more savvy, and they tend to be a little bit more educated, and they tend to be a little bit more of a they're stimulated by mental aspects, and they're stimulated by scientific method rather than some other factor that would drive them into that cult of personality, or that cult of that cult that keeps followers where they are and paralyzed regardless of what they know is true, you know. So we'll leave it at that. But basically, the I think the animosity between Harley Davidson and the others are just, like a new brand. They want a little bit more control of what they have, or starting out they want a little bit more control of their future, and a little bit more control of what they have. So they tend to resort to some wild methods and mannerisms to acquire that, or acquire what we tend not to see and hear as as a norm. So I'll just leave it at that. But what I'm trying to say is that the majority of Harley Davidson riders are older. A lot of them are retired. They are over 50, and their senses are a little bit more dull than the younger crowd. And asking them to get on a crotch rocket, or to zip around a racetrack at 200 miles plus, it's just crazy. It's just totally crazy. That's how I see it. You can't ask that from these human beings. You can't put them on a rocket ship and blast them out of space and say, okay, well, how do you like it? Because they're probably going to say, get me the hell out of here, or something like that. It's not going to happen. And, the more you pursue it, the more futile it's going to get. So the comedy is that it is what it is. Harley Davidson has upped the ante on a lot of manufacturers now, and a lot of their customers are recognizing it, and it's causing their customer base is expanding and their sales are expanding, and that's a good thing. It's good when our society, and it's good for America when these things happen, and happen the way they are. But sometimes, like in my other video, I said that Harley, your customers are killing you. It's because they're young. The older people aren't out to kill themselves per se. It's the younger crowd that are always drinking, always high on something, always trying to show off, always worried about things that aren't really important. Like, oh well, did you they're more worried about a scratch than they are with the DOT rules and regulation. In other words, they'll look at a vehicle and notice a scratch on the vehicle, rather than whether or not it can pass a DOT transportation test. If you get pulled over on the side of the road by the Department of Transportation, they're going to look thoroughly at things that have to be that have to be right. And some people look at that and they go immediately to the scratch, and you're not going to change the way they think or the way they see things. They see as a scratch as that bigger something more important than DOT regulations. And hey, so be it. It is what it is. So have fun. Again, motorcycles are about freedom, they're about liberty, and they're about the pursuit of happiness. If you don't find any of those factors, such as financial reward, it's just a money pit, man. You're wasting gas, you're wasting money, you're almost killing yourself every day, you're unhappy, you feel trapped, you feel like you're a prisoner. Motorcycle's not for you. I don't think any vehicle is going to be for you. But the roads of America are dangerous per se. People are frustrated with their daily commute, their driving experience every day. Owning a motorcycle might help, might not. Who knows? We'll talk about it later.